This is Keep It Juicy, episode 13. Hello, and welcome to Keep It Juicy, a weekly podcast that features experts on living a juicy life. What's a juicy life? It's a lifestyle for those who have put in a few miles and are ready to turn off road, who are still learning and excited, who are fearless, or who are scared but dare anyway. Juicies are grown-ups, so some of our language may not be appropriate for children. Juicies are bold, passionate, and ready to squeeze every drop of juice out of life. I'm your host, Helen Midnight. Are you ready? Let's keep it juicy. Hi, I'm Helen Midnight. I like to think I'm way too smart to be conned. But then every time an email shows up that says my Apple ID was used to buy some fitness software that's hundreds of dollars, I go frantically making sure it's not true. You know, the truth is, scams and financial abuse for over 50s, they're on the rise. Maybe it's because there's so many more of us around to scam. I don't know. But today's guest is attorney Michael Hackard. Michael has a book called Wolf at the Door, Undue Influence and Elder Financial Abuse. And he talks with us about how to figure out when someone is financially abusing a loved one. He also talks about how to avoid getting scammed ourselves. Today on Keep It Juicy, Michael Hackard. Michael, thank you so much for being on Keep It Juicy today, and welcome. I really appreciate your being here.
Well, I'm actually thrilled to be here. I think this should be fun.
Yeah, I read your book and have all kinds of questions, but this is personal for you, right? Because you mentioned that your mother's family was affected by elder financial abuse many years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Sure. It was in 1989, and I was at my office. My mother called me late in the morning and told me that her 93-year-old aunt had died in San Francisco. So within a couple hours, we were on our way to San Francisco. And as we were on our way, she was reflecting upon the family's concern that her aunt had lost a lot of her assets, or at least that they weren't going to be easy to get to, because there had been a caretaker who had prevented the family from visiting the aunt or from telephoning the aunt. And in fact, when anyone went to the aunt's house, the caretaker intervened and wouldn't let them in.
Oh,
Well,
man.
yeah, it was bad. And in '89, I'd been practicing law, I don't know, 12 or 13 years. And so I thought pretty much I could do anything, but I learned I couldn't. And because even back then, we contacted law enforcement, including, in my memory, the FBI, and no one could do anything. So we'll just keep going on the story a bit. And my mom and I got to the aunt's house. The caretaker didn't want to let us in, but ultimately did let us in. And my aunt, or my mom's aunt, my great aunt, and my mom have a great Irish background, and so that means good sense of humor, but also a fighting Irish. So it didn't take my mom long at all to get into a battle with the caretaker. I separated them. But it turned out that the concern was real. We found many family heirlooms, as well as all of the family pictures were in the garbage can, same day the aunt died. So, and the caretaker let us know that the aunt had left her the house.
Oh, my
And
gosh.
yeah, and it was a very nice San Francisco house. So time went on. It obviously it went to litigation. I didn't litigate it. Others did litigate it, but they were hamstrung by what is essentially back then a 400-year-old law as to undue influence, but California's own law had been put in 1872. So basically hamstrung by that. And yet fast forward 8 or 9 years, and just a couple months before my mom died, she was just distributed from that estate a fraction of the amount of money that she and her cousin in charities had inherited. And the caretaker's lawyer, I think, was paid over $1 million from the estate.
Whoa.
So that one, dug pretty deep, and that was the personal experience.
Well, I had no idea that the situation was so prevalent. I mean, in your book, you cite a statistic that puts the nationwide cost at almost $3 billion a year. That's B with the B as in boy. What goes into that cost?
Well, a lot of it, goes into basically losses from elderly people while they're alive, because there are a lot of transfers and defrauding of the elderly while they're alive. But the other part of it are transfers that are set up, testamentary transfers or trust transfers set to go at the death of the elder, and they're ending up in the wrong pockets. They're ending up with people that have either defrauded the elder or have utilized excessive persuasion to get the elder and to overcome the elder's will, the natural estate that the elder would otherwise have.
Now, you mentioned there's 4 what you call elements of undue influence. Can you walk us through what those are?
Yeah, California looked at these issues and said that they're indicia of undue influence, and so it's pretty good. And I think they were based upon some psychiatric studies and social studies. But anyway, it starts with the vulnerability of the victim. And it used to be in law. So if you look at the victim, it used to be that you'd simply look, does that person have competency? And the newer law now here, and I think other states are doing similar things, but the newer law is you look, competency or mental deficit doesn't necessarily matter, or mental competency. I mean, you could be fully competent, a professor at Harvard, and still be unduly influenced. So you look at other factors, such as you look at illness, you look at cultural issues, you can just look at age, loss of memories, particular health as to that time. So there are, a number of factors you can look at. The other thing is the authority of the person who gets the change, who basically influences the elder. And normally it's some kind of close relationship. So it could be an attorney, it could be a doctor, but oftentimes it's a caretaker, and maybe even more often it's a family member. And but that's one of the things that you look at. And then the other thing, you look at the tactics that are done. And oftentimes these things would be done we'll call it under the cover of night. They're not clear. They're not clear until the elder dies. So you have these transfers that are secret, that are hidden. And oftentimes you see that because family members, I really truly get calls every day. It may be one call, but sometimes more, about issues like this. So, and oftentimes it's a family member saying, I can't get in to see my mom, or I can't get in to see my dad, and I have my older brother who won't let me in, and I'm wondering what's happening. So anyway, those are some of the strategies or tactics of the wrongdoer. And then the final thing is that it's an inequitable result. For the most part, you test that from the elder's perspective, and the way you look at that is you say, well, gee, for 50 years, the elder wanted to split up, his or her estate between their 4 children, and suddenly 3 months, or rather, it can be 3 weeks before the elder dies, the child that's living with the elder takes the elder to an attorney and gets the entire estate given to that child. And so, anyway,
Man, and specifically with elder financial abuse, you talk about some things to look out for, and I know the freezing out, which is what happened in your case, is one of them. Can you kind of walk me through those?
Sure. And that's what people are wondering. So what is it that I should be looking for? And I'd say if you have the power to look at it, you try to have some kind of financial oversight, and whether that's just looking at the elder's bank statements every month, or talking to the elder about it, but try to have some kind of financial oversight. The other thing that can help are revocable trust. they're not bulletproof because you could, and it happens, you can set up a revocable trust that does everything you want, and then in the last months of life, or somebody gets to the elder and gets things all changed up. And trusts are not really recorded anywhere, so you don't necessarily know what's going on there. The other thing that's important is communication, and of course that gets impaired when there's elder financial abuse. But you do your best for communication. Other things for elders are you do things like, well, I had somebody tell me yesterday, I'm not really giving away any particular confidences, but there was an elderly person who received a call supposedly from the IRS, who told this person, who was in her mid 90s, that she was going to jail and that she needed to call immediately. And the poor lady was just, frazzled, like thought she really needed to make that return call. So we were able to pass on, no, that's just one and more form of abuse. So
And it's even worse when there are Alzheimer's or dementia patients, right?
absolutely. And of course, Alzheimer's and dementia are vastly underdiagnosed. I remember some of the numbers because any profits from the book we give to the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. But according to them, there are almost 6 million people in the US with Alzheimer's, and California, about 600,000 people. So, yeah, it's truly precarious once someone has Alzheimer's or dementia, that advancing dementia, and dementia by its nature does advance. So because people just don't have the memory.
But how do you tell the difference? Because, I have a relative who has dementia, and there's suspicion and paranoia are sort of two of the things that come with it. So how do you tell what's legitimate and what's not? What should you be looking for?
What sounds like you have maybe a diagnosis there, where the suspicion and paranoia, and oftentimes a feeling like people are stealing
Yeah,
from him or her.
right.
So if you have a diagnosis, you can pretty well. We have a chart over here that basically, charts the 5 levels of dementia. It's just one way to look at it, but at that level, it's problematic because if they're paranoid, they may fall for someone who can say they can cure whatever problems they have if they'll just hand everything over to him or her. So, I mean, diagnosis helps. Reading about this helps. Sometimes I've told people before to go to an Alzheimer's association where there usually can be quite a lot of help because it's really frustrating to handle on your own. And I've sat in meetings before with someone who has either some kind of advanced dementia or Alzheimer's with their child, who is just furious at their parent because their parent begins to repeat things.
Oh,
So that obviously
heartbreaking.
doesn't help a lot. It is
Yeah.
heartbreaking, and it's not. And for those people, I say, then go meet with the Alzheimer's Association or go read about this. I think it helps in particular if they can talk to people that have experienced.
But,
Uh,
just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you're wrong. I mean, you can be both paranoid and right about somebody taking advantage of you. So that's, I guess, as someone who cares about somebody, what do you do about that? You just have to look into everything that they accuse, or what?
Well, absolutely. And, the fact that there's a diagnosis doesn't mean that people have lost capacity.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you have to look into it, and you look for some of the markers. And oftentimes, the marker when they're getting taken advantage of is the isolation. It's like what I talked about my mother's aunt. So they're being isolated by someone. So the typical things are their cell phone is taken away, or a number is blocked. People are not given access to the house, or if you're given access, and this happens all the time, there's a baby monitor in the room where you're meeting with your relative, and obviously whoever is there and is trying to isolate is hearing the other side of that monitor. So you're right. I mean, sometimes things are really happening, and you need to listen to them and say, okay, I'll look at this.
And what if the scammer is a family member? Because I was reading your book, and it occurred to me that all of the things that you said to watch out for not only apply to elder abuse, but really domestic violence. I mean, there's sort of some of the same markers: the isolation, the trying to tell them something that isn't real and convince them. trying to control them. All those things are things that are very similar. So, but in the case where you have an elderly relative, there's usually somebody in the family who steps forward and says, "Okay, I'll get the power of attorney. I'll take care of Auntie. She can't really deal with her own financial affairs anymore." So if you're the person who's sort of half grateful that this person stepped forward, at what point do you need to say, "Okay, what's the accountability here, and what kind of accountability should you ask for?"
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the reason it is because if you put somebody in there who then won't, whose actions are not transparent, you've simply created more doubt in all of the other family members' minds. So when I've advised people with regard to this, I say, if you're a power of attorney, be transparent with what you're doing. And if you're taking particular action with regard to medical aspects of your elder's care, be transparent on that. Let people know about it, because to the extent it's hidden, it raises all those same levels of concern.
And how do you balance the and I realize that you're an attorney and not a psychologist or something, but how do you balance the need to be transparent and over communicate about what you're doing so that nobody thinks you're doing something shady, and honoring the privacy of the person that you're taking care of?
Well, that you pretty well identified. That is a problem. Um, and you struggle with that, like, just how much do you tell others, because you want to identify, or you want to assist somebody and not embarrass them, and yet on the other hand, there is a certain need to know at times. I get that, and I use this analogy at times when you're trying to handle a very troubled situation and you don't know exactly the answers to it. So I call it, you've heard the analogy, riding the tiger. And I always tell people, okay, you're going to be riding the tiger here. You have no idea how you're going to get off this tiger, except if you jump off, this tiger's going to get you. So you have to wait and keep your mind going, and look for opportunities to solve whatever problem it is you have.
Hmm. And what if there is no diminished capacity? I mean, why aren't the victims reporting this stuff, and how do you even report it?
Well, every state's a little different as to how you report it. And again, you don't necessarily, in fact, you and I can be unduly influenced. It's just, you know, whoever picks out a way to do that. But so you don't necessarily have to have diminished capacity. But as to reporting, there are different levels of adult protective services. They are not perfect by any means, but they're probably better than what existed 20 years ago. And you get some strange circumstances on adult protective services. I mean, we've seen them. People who are truly good and well taking care of a parent, and somebody who's jealous of that turns them in. Again, I think that there just has to be a certain transparency there, but it doesn't solve it. Some of these problems just don't get solved very easily.
Well, and I think a lot of people, when they think of this kind of thing, they're thinking of somebody who is elderly and feeble and somebody needs to take care of them. But there are a lot of scammers out there who are targeting perfectly healthy and with it seniors, right?
Yeah, exactly. So and that's it. You see those kind of things occurring. You get a message on your computer and it says it's Google, and they need to fix your computer. And so you tie into something there. Well, it turns out it's some scam artist who's just grabbed all of your passwords off of your computer, and you can be perfectly bright and capable and have no impairment at all, and fall for something like that. And so those schemes are out there.
And it seems to me, but I could be wrong. It seems to me that seniors in particular are being targeted. Is that wrong, or are we just hearing more about that?
No, I think you're exactly right. Seniors are being targeted because, because seniors are more vulnerable. They maybe are retired. They're not involved in the everyday business or professional world, possibly, so that they may not be quite as attuned as they once were to issues of fraud and issues of people taking advantage of them.
Mm. So one of the things that you talk about is the deathbed transfer, and I'm curious. You know, yeah, that could be a very vulnerable, awful way to scam somebody, but how do you tell the difference as an outsider or a family member between that and someone who knows they're about to die and they're suddenly enlightened and realize, oh, I should have given all of my money to this person because I've been terrible to them in life or whatever. I mean, how can you tell the difference?
Yeah, and you're well, sometimes you're pretty certain just the way that it looks, but you're not always certain, and maybe that's even reflected in the law because when it comes to elder financial abuse, and the standard of proof to a jury is more likely than not, or preponderance of the evidence, which in one way to visualize is like you have 50.1% of the evidence in your favor and 49.9 in the other person's favor. So, yeah, it can be difficult. Sometimes it looks very obvious, and I've seen it where a daughter is physically restrained from seeing her parent, while somebody else is getting the will or the trust changed. We see a lot of this type of thing, and so it's sometimes it's just the smell test. You just look at it and say that doesn't look too good. That doesn't look right. And I've seen that where nurses have intervened to stop people from, approaching a senior who's just out of anesthesia or who is in such pain that he or she can't concentrate. I'm sure your listeners they're going to know they're going to have these experiences or a neighbor who's experienced this because I guess the baby boomers there are a lot of baby boomers and so a lot of people to be vulnerable to this.
Yeah, there are. And so let's talk about stepmothers, evil and otherwise.
Yeah, I I always kind of feel bad about my stepmother articles, except that they're true, and it's not beating up on stepmothers. But there are basically 7 times as many stepmothers, widows, as there are stepfather widowers, and it has to do with demographics and how long we live.
Yeah, sure. Women
So
live longer in general, right?
exactly. And so they're going to be more likely to be the surviving step parent, I guess, by 7 times. So, and the issues that arise are, they're natural issues, and that is, who gets, is there an even split, say, of an estate between the or between the father, we'll say the father and the stepmother, and that a lot of times depends on how long they were married.
Mm.
The other thing, though, is that it is very common. We litigate this one regularly. We're saying it could be the last months of life or maybe the last few years of life, where a stepmother gets the father to change over the trust or the will and to give maybe most of everything to that step parent's children. So, and that gets to be, that usually the kids of the father are not too happy because they knew that dad maybe had them in his will or trust for 30 years. And so seeing in the last days of his life, seeing the change isn't something that they readily accept.
Do you see it the other way, where the surviving children, adult children or not adult children, are more likely to accuse the stepmother just because she's the stepmother?
Because she's a stepmother. And of
Yeah.
course, there's all the classic literature on stepmothers. Yeah, I think that there's an automatic skepticism there because there's a strained relationship. There's oftentimes the stepmother married the father who used to be in their home, and so there, yeah, and then just the fact that the change occurs doesn't mean that it was elder financial abuse, and I understand that. But yeah, there's very deep emotions associated with a stepmother relationship, and I
Well,
would say less than the stepfather relationship.
yeah, I think, that just knowing friends and family, I would say that's pretty accurate. So this podcast is aimed at people who sort of know how to live with gusto, um, and so I would like to hear some advice for people who are baby boomers, for them or for their parents, about how not to become a victim? What's some stuff that they can stay on top of so they don't wind up in the horror story canons of books like yours?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think among different things, but keep communications open. I think that that's just very important. I think another important thing, just from experience, is that a parent talk to their children, and they can sometimes their children are elderly, can be 65 or above, but tell them what the plan is as to an estate. And I know that some freaks some people out, but it's so much better if people know, okay, well, this is the intent, so that they're not, surprised. And those changes may occur around the edges, or I suppose they could be dramatic changes. But I think it's a smart thing, and I know other litigators in the field with me think that it's a smart thing to tell your children what your plans are with regard to your estate.
And I guess from the other side of things, even if you have hired a caretaker or a caregiver because you can't be there yourself or you're unable to be there yourself, you really should be checking in, and what kinds of things, like what kinds of probing questions should you be asking so you're not offending them, but you're keeping tabs on things.
Yeah, a caregiver just has to know that you've got to be skeptical. This is your parent. You have your job is to protect your parent and to prevent any damage to your parent. So within the last few days, somebody talked to me about this. They said that they brought in a caretaker for their mother, and I'm just kind of generalizing a bit, but they checked on that caretaker within the first few days and found out that their mother's belongings were being lost, and some valuable belongings. So they stepped in very early and were able to fire that caretaker. But it's a problem. I've just dealt with so many of these issues, of caretaker issues, and another one just comes to mind where I knew this person for a long time, but a lady in her 90s who was writing a check every day to her caretaker for the caretaker's salary. The only problem is it was a monthly check being paid every day because she had no memory whatsoever that she'd written the check the day before.
Oh
And that,
man.
yeah, we brought in the law enforcement on that one.
Well, and can you just briefly talk to me about how long it takes to put these things to rights? Because I think some people think, okay, I've caught this person, I've fired them, I'm going to get my money back tomorrow.
Yeah, you don't get your money back tomorrow. And I probably, we deal much more where it's the estate that is involved. And in that case, litigation, can take eh, maybe 18 months on average. And our job is to win. You can't always win, but that's what my job is. And we hit pretty hard because I believe in these cases. And I don't like it when elderly people get ripped off. I guess the other thing is when you're dealing, say, with someone who is alive, um, those are those are cases that you may have a quick turnaround. I mean, sometimes we'll turn it around in a couple days. Other times we're having to pursue someone who's making up every excuse in the world as to why they did what they did. So it could take a while.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And I hope people listen to this, and I hope that they are a lot more protective of both themselves and their parents as a result. So thank you so much, Michael.
Well, and thank you very much.
If you want to get Michael's book on elder financial abuse or find out more about Michael, check out the financial resources page on our website, keepitjuicy.com. You can keep up with us on Facebook or Twitter at keepitjuicy.com, or you can go to my website and sign up for the newsletter. Oh, and it really helps if you go onto iTunes and leave a review. Meanwhile, go out there and keep it juicy.